Aussie DNA, the phrase widely mocked by the Australian football public for its persistent use under former head coach Graham Arnold. It was believed to be this intangible quality, some combination of grit, determination, togetherness, all in the face of adversity that qualified Australia for the 2022 Men's World Cup. But maybe we had it all wrong. Maybe Aussie DNA isn't about getting yourself out of the corner. Maybe it's about backing yourself into one in the first place. Think about it. Everything Australian football has gone through. Always potential, always on the cusp of going mainstream and becoming a respected football nation and a respected code in Australia. But is it ever that easy? So whilst the 48-team World Cup allows for some fresh wiggle room, Australia's draw against Saudi Arabia last Thursday night means that direct qualification, which should have been so much easier than before, will likely go down to the final game of the group against the same foe. We'll take stock now that we're halfway through the group, look ahead to Bahrain on Wednesday morning. We'll talk Richard Peel's pot shot at Football Australia and the OFC Professional League on this episode of the Round Ball Australia podcast. My name is Lachlan Avil again, welcoming back Jacob Stevens. Jacob, you took off hosting duties for me last Thursday night. Very nicely done, but it's nice to be back.
Yeah, no, I'm more than happy to have you back. There's a lot less work on my end when I'm not hosting, so I do enjoy that.
Christian Montegan, hello to you as well. Helped steady the ship last week.
Good evening. Yeah, no, Jacob did a good job, to be fair. I think a lot of people saw your ex-post, Lockie, a few days ago to say, give Jacob bad reviews so I can go back on hosting duties. And that's exactly what's happened.
I was never going to let him have it for long. But it's a special occasion, of course, guys. It is episode 150.
Huge.
Century and a half. Yeah, massive. Christian, you just got the 100 individual.
Yeah.
The partnership number coming up strong as well. It's always good fun talking football with you guys. Of course, we're in the men's international window. The Socceroos are the big story. I gave a little bit of a monologue. That was a bit of a synopsis of my the piece that I put in on last Thursday's game. What do you think of it, Jacob? Because I go into the phrase Aussie DNA. It's a little bit on the nose, but it just seems it seems really on par with everything that goes on in Australian football. It's always supposed to be easier. It's always supposed to be better and bigger than this, but we still always tend to find ourselves in these difficult situations.
Yeah, no, it's funny because when you first posted the title of the article in the chat, it was like I was like, that's scathing. But no, I mean, it does make sense what you're saying, right? And I think it comes down to this fact that when teams sort of attach this identity to themselves, it can be a case of it's difficult to let that go, and in a way it makes them more likely to find themselves in that situation because they're like, oh well, we're the gritty underdogs with the back against the wall, rah, 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 and so they're not actually trying to win games comfortably from the start because that's not who we are. I think in some ways perhaps the side has leaned a little bit too far into sort of attaching themselves to this identity, and that's why we're seeing this, right? You see it with football teams and even club football teams, right? Do it all the time, where it's like, especially when a manager has a specific way of playing, or they're a super defensive team, and so then that team just plays super defensive all the time, even if they're capable of better, and they find themselves in really difficult situations, or this team really likes to score goals, and so they go out and score a bunch of goals but forget to defend, and that they're not mutually exclusive, right? You can do both things at the same time. So I do think that Australia, while it's this comeback and this grit and this determination is part of what makes the team so effective in qualification and in these tournaments, it's also a detraction because it means that the players are focusing on that too much, right? Rather than focusing on not having to fight back, not having to be gritty in the first place. So I think that's where trying to find that balance is perhaps sort of overlooked a little bit, because it is a case of every time this happens, it's all, oh, that's fantastic. The Socceroos are back with their Aussie DNA doing the, and it's like, yeah, but they shouldn't be, right? And I think that's sort of what you're trying to get at is this case of like, why do they have to be like this all the time? Why can't it be different for once? And I do agree with that point. I don't know what the solution is, to be honest. I think, because when you've got this sort of moniker and you've got this identity, it's something that fans can relate to, and everybody's sort of really latched onto it, and they seem to love it. But then you've got that downside of when it doesn't work out, everybody suddenly hates it again. So yeah, honestly, I don't know what the solution to this is, and I guess obviously Popper's got a lot on his hands there to try and figure out how to get this team, comfortably playing football and playing the level of football that we know that they can, rather than just having to keep bailing themselves out of these situations. Yeah, like I said, don't know what the solution is, but I think that you raise a really good point with it, in that, perhaps it is a case of Australia is backing themselves into these corners because they're focused too much on the corner in the first place, rather than thinking, a bit more broadly about success and trying to avoid the corner. They're like, oh, well, we know we're good when we're in it. So, why bother avoiding it?
Do you think, Christian, it's a mindset that is likely to change under Popovic at all? Because we know perhaps on the field there's not a massive philosophy difference between Graham Arnold and Tony Popovic, but definitely I think you'd say maybe the professional standards that Tony Popovic expects of his players would maybe be a little bit higher. It's not so much buddy. I'm finding it hard to find the words to describe it, but definitely the day in, day out operational kind of performance measures that Popovic have might be a little bit higher than Arnold. And maybe that would help to kind of shift that mindset of, okay, we're no longer the guys doing the hunting. We want to position ourselves as this real powerhouse, and everyone else should be trying to hunt us.
Yeah, definitely. You raise another good point there. I think, with Popovic, it's still going to take a bit of time to see the difference between him and Arnold, because we've discussed before on this podcast that their styles are pretty similar, defensively resolute, going forward, the lack of ideas are there again for all to see, especially in that Saudi Arabia game. So the same issues are there. It's just, I think Popovic just gives that son a little bit extra in the team. You can see a bit more fight, a bit more determination, that energy, the intensity that you expect from a Popovic side. But at the same time, when a new coach comes in, you expect that anyway. And so that's why I think you need to sort of give it a bit more time to see that real shift, to see, has Popovic actually made a substantial difference compared to when Graham Arnold was there? Otherwise, we'd sort of be sitting
But then
here
the question then, Christian, is how long does this new manager bounce last anyway, right? When do we go, right, this is Popovic actually taking charge versus this is just the new manager bounce? Because, I mean, in club football, it's 1 or 2 rounds, right? Because it's such an intense period, and they're doing 3 or 4 trainings a week with the side, so they've got more opportunity to do that. Is it 2 windows with Popper, and then you can go this is his effect, rather than it just being a case of they're happy to be rid of Arnold and with somebody new? Like what are we determining
in this very specific circumstance? It is 2 windows, because the Socceroos literally don't play again until March.
Yeah.
So there's like 4 months in between where we're not going to see them. So in that situation, maybe it's 2 windows.
I think you can get away with it a bit more in terms of international football when there's a new manager, because you see a manager come in who has that real, they want to stamp their authority, and you see players sometimes after a while they get sick and tired of it all. And that manager bounce only happens, it fades away after, a few rounds or so, maybe, for half a season. But because the national team is so on and off, I think Popovic can get away with it a bit more. So that's where I think national team and club football, it does sort of, separate a bit in terms of that. But yeah, when we talk about this DNA, going back to, Lockie's piece earlier last week, I always come back to Craig Foster and what he keeps referring to say, it's always this, we've got to move away from this Australian DNA where, yes, it's good to fight and sort of do the nitty gritty, but at what point do we start to, gain our own model, gain our identity? And he's been harping on about that for, 20 or so years, ever since I've sort of been following the Socceroos since I was a kid. And the same thing just keeps sort of happening time and time again. The one sort of anomaly would be Ange Postecoglou when he was in charge. But even then, he had his difficulties with the board, and that's why he sort of separated and parted ways, because he thought, okay, at the end of the day, I'm not going to really get my ideas across. It's not going to work out, so I'm just going to walk away. And it's just those cultural problems within. And I think you mentioned Lockie in the piece as well. It's sort of a cultural thing as well, where we're struggling a bit to grapple with and I guess move away from. It's just intact in our DNA. It's hard to explain in words, but it really is true. And in a way, it's good, to sort of rely on that. But at the same time, if you don't have that balance, as Jacob referred to, and the, I guess, identity, like I said before, then it's like, where are we going? Where's our future? Where's the objective at the end of the day?
While we're talking about some of the differences between Arnold and Popovich, we had a listener write in a question. Julian on Twitter said, one of the best things to come from Graham Arnold and his era as head coach of the Socceroos was his ability to find players and get them to play for the Socceroos. And we're talking about the whole, Ancestry.com kind of joke. Harry Sutar, Martin Boyle, a lot of Scots, of course, in there. With Popovich saying he won't sell the shirt, was the quote, Jacob. The question from Julian is, do we think that he can uncover any of these fringe Socceroos? And part of me wants to believe that, again, kind of as positioning yourself as this kind of powerhouse, you don't want to be the country that is trying to find all of these players. But I mean, Harry Sutar, like, we brought him in, how can he not be such a great addition? So part of me hopes that it's in some kind of convenience way. We've maybe already found those players. We don't have to go looking for them. That's kind of my view.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, does this side need to find these fringe players? Like, is it necessary at this point in time? And the ones that recently you think of, the likes of Gethin Jones, who, look, obviously was the scapegoat for that Asian Cup campaign, but it wasn't like he was a tremendous world-class talent and everybody was like, whoa, why didn't we find him earlier? Or, like, it doesn't always pan out. And yes, okay, Sutar's been fantastic. Boyle's had his moments as well. But yeah, just I think this idea of finding is the problem, right? Is that we shouldn't have to be going out to find these players. They should be making themselves known. Because if you're having to find a player, it means that they're probably not performing in a big league or at a high level. They're not doing very well. If you have to find a player, right? I think, if you're trying to convince a player to join, that's a slightly different thing, right? Because if you go, oh, there's this player that's playing really well in, Europe somewhere, dual nationality, or like, that's different to finding a player. I think that's where I really take sort of offense with this idea is you, if you're finding a player, they're not going to be good. It's about convincing them, and I honestly, I don't think that Popper is. I mean, he's already said, I'm not going to sell the shirt. I don't think that's him saying that I'm not going to try and convince these players to join. I think that's more of a statement to those who are in and around the team already, with regards to those who might be selected one window but not the next, and those who would be selected but are making decisions otherwise. I think it might be more in reference to that. I don't know. Obviously, I'm not Tony Popovich, so I can't speak exactly what was on his mind at the time, but I think that might be leaning more towards what he was trying to get, rather than saying, I'm not going to try and, convince players that, are dual nationality. I don't know. Maybe you've got a different take on that.
Yeah, no, I actually disagree with you on that. I think part of that is him being this first coach of the Socceroos as part of the golden generation. He seems to be very much going down the route of, building pride in the shirt, having pride of the badge, really wanting to play for Australia. And again, I do think it is somewhat convenient that Graham Arnold has then done all the digging of those kind of multinational players to bring out the likes of Harry Sutar. So I think it's that situation has definitely made it easier for Popovich, but that's not to say that he wouldn't have done this if he came in 7 years ago. It's just say, no, this is the Socceroos. You need to be proud to play in this shirt. And if I have to go and then ask you a question about whether you're interested or not, it means that you're too far down on that scale and you don't deserve to play for the Socceroos. That's how I view it. And look, I think it's a good thing building forwards because we see in Europe it's happening more and more players withdrawing from national team duty, opting to stay with their clubs for little niggles and something. That's often the excuse that's used. But to play for your country is something completely different. And, you look at the reaction from Anthony Caceres playing, maybe 15 minutes at Amy Park on Thursday night and still talking about it being the best moment of his career and finally getting that call up to play for his country. It's very important. So, I think if we can try and change that mindset of, everyone's against us to just really celebrating what it is to play for the Socceroos and play for Australia as well. Christian, I think that's the most important thing going forward.
Yeah, definitely. I think I was going to add as well. Has that been the concern in years past with Arnold, for example, where he's tried to sort of pinpoint these sort of rare gems where it sort of tells you, okay, is there a lack of depth in this squad? Does Arnold really trust his his core players, because he has chosen, a core group for a few years. But you've seen, Jacob touched on a couple of players there before, just trying to just bring in a couple of gems. And we've seen for Christian Volpato, for instance, this constant discussion about playing for Australia or whether he's going to play for Italy. Like, if that was Popovich, that would never happen. Like, if you don't make a decision, like, there won't be another discussion about it, right? So I think that's where I think Popovich is good in this instance. Perhaps maybe Popovich is a bit more trustworthy, gains a lot of more trust in his squad compared to previous managers for the Socceroos. That's not to say that Popovich isn't experimenting with new players. We've already seen that in the past couple of windows, which is a good thing. But at the same time, I think it's a bit of a lack of depth issue as well, where we're just trying to hope and pray that, okay, we're going to find the next big thing here, where really we shouldn't be digging all that deep, as Jacob said before.
Interesting. Well, one thing to come out of this game specifically against Saudi Arabia the other night, 1.04 million people watching across TV and 10 Play, Paramount, whatever the different streaming services are. That is the biggest audience since Japan at home in the 2022 qualifiers, that final round. So it's funny, this dichotomy of the big TV audience, Jacob, yet another topic out of this game has just been the massive negative reaction all over social media, and people talking about it. And it's always hard to win, right? Because people have so long to think between international windows. The expectations get built up, and there's always so much potential. And the coach can never get a squad selection right. They can never get the team selection right. They can never get the tactics right. It's so difficult, and it's a football issue as a whole. But over 1 million people watching, you do like to see that support for a national team.
Oh, 1 million is huge. That's just the TV. Does that include streaming numbers as well?
That's combined, yes.
That's combined. I mean, it's still a fantastic number though, and it's it's great to see these numbers coming back. But you mentioned a sort of negative response on social media. That's part and parcel for Australian football at this point in time. And you mentioned it's a football issue, which is true, but especially so with Australia. It's just, it seems like there's never a happy moment. Doesn't matter what you do, people are always going to be angry at you. And I think we've seen over the years that be the case here in Australia, where it's just because people, right, this is the problem with social media, is that you want to do what gets reactions, and what gets reactions are being negative and these hot takes and things, because it gets people going. And it might not be an accurate representation, but then once it starts, it's difficult to stop, and it sort of just begins this big snowballing effect where other people go, I agree with this, and it just keeps building, keeps building, and it just becomes this massive negative ball of just negativity. And I mean, that's the problem with social media, but like you mentioned, that's a football thing, and it's not just football, it's every sport, it's everything in life. There's always negative things on social media. You see more negative than you do positive, because like I said, that's what gets people going, that's what gets those interactions and those reactions. And I think honestly at this point in time, if you're paying attention to most of the takes on social media, you probably deserve the negativity in your life. I say that as probably one of the most pessimistic people that's ever been on this podcast, but I'm speaking from experience here. But no,
it's good to have that good discussion though, isn't it? It's when it goes too far. It's when it goes too far, because we don't want to be sitting here and saying, oh yeah, great result, a point at home. Like, we want to be having the hard discussions, but you see people on social media just take it a bit too far.
And Popovich said that, I believe, in his very first press conferences, that having that discussion and being critical, or at least thinking critical, you know what I mean? Like thinking deeply about something and always wanting to push for successful results is a good thing.
He said even when you win, that's when we actually should be having more discussion. That's when we should be thinking, okay, how can we improve? Don't just settle for, okay, we won, so that's it.
It's exactly. It's about the performance and always trying to build on that. Let me drop another deep line about Australian football on you. Perhaps, given the state of everything and how many enemies that football seems to have, maybe it's hard to recognise your friends. There's a good tagline for you. Put that on a bumper sticker. Let's look forward a little bit more specifically to Bahrain. I don't know why I thought this would be at regular viewing hours, but I looked up the fixture today and had it at 5 a.m, and I was absolutely devastated. It's been a while since we've had one of those really wacky time zones for a Socceroos game, so I think I just got caught up in the regularity of it. Nishan Volupale will not travel to Bahrain. He will be staying in Melbourne to begin his rehab with Melbourne Victory. His ankle will not require surgery, which is a good thing, Christian, for Victory fans to hear. But yeah, he won't travel, so he won't be a part of that game. But it appears that no one else is replacing him in the squad. I feel like we would have heard about that by now.
Yeah, I think Popovich has a few options up his sleeve where he doesn't have to rely on another call-up at the last minute. Getting a player already from a club, getting him to travel over to Bahrain, I just don't think it's worth it. Maybe if it was close to travel, and maybe he'd sort of ponder it, but I don't think it's necessary. And looking at the Valupale injury against Saudi, I thought, okay, this is not going to be good for Victory. It looks pretty bad, especially on the replay.
He has such a good start as well.
Yeah, the way he sort of rolled his ankle there, you thought, okay, yeah, geez, this isn't going to be good. But thankfully, what we're hearing is not too serious, doesn't require surgery. So that's all good news for Victory. Might be out for a couple of weeks or so, but you'd rather that than, sort of a season-ending injury. Because, yeah, like you said, Lockie's just been in tremendous form, really, sort of lit the season alive. Both the Victory and the Socceroos getting that debut goal against China a few weeks ago. So it definitely sort of cemented his spot at the moment in Popovich's plans, at least off the bench, and sort of an impact role coming on, which is great for him because he's fully deserved it based off his performances this season. It's just about the consistency moving forward.
In terms of who they shape up with on the pitch, Jacob, I don't see a whole lot of changes coming through. I think Goodwin in for Aiden Hrustic is the obvious one that I would be extremely surprised if that doesn't happen. Aiden Hrustic had a okay first half, didn't really set the world on fire. Came off at half time. Popovich said that wasn't injury related at all. He did go down a couple of minutes before the break, but apparently that was just a change. And tactically, obviously, we're not going to see too much change. We know that about Popovich. Potentially, I see a little bit of change in the wing-back use. I look back to the game against China. They were a lot more aggressive than what we've seen against Japan and Saudi. So maybe not quite that flat five in defense, pushing up a little bit higher, get involved with the press, maybe a little more aggressive in that way. Do you see any other tactical personnel changes going into this one?
Well, yeah, look, tactical change is probably very limited. I do agree with the wing backs. I think that a key component to the success that Australia had in attack against China was the use of the wing backs because it opened space for those two sort of wide tens. It was Goodwin and Irinkunda that game, and then McGree in the second half. To play in because the Chinese midfielders were occupied with the runs from the wing back, which was just leaving space for those tens to play in. So I do agree that it's probably if you want to be on the front foot, which Australia need to be here, then playing with those more aggressive wing backs, you're still going to have a back three, so your rest defense is still going to be solid, and you're hopefully going to be opening up that space a little bit more for those playmakers more centrally to get involved with the game, which is something that we didn't really see much against Japan or against Saudi Arabia. It was a lot of the chances came, especially against Japan, were on the break, on the counter. Against Saudi Arabia, a lot of it was more established sort of wing play, especially later in the game. So, I think that opening up those central channels or those half spaces a little bit more will probably help out and just add an extra element to attack. But with Popovich, we don't see a whole lot of tactical changes from him, and we know that. We know he likes to have his plan A and sort of stick with it. So if anything, it's going to be, personnel that I could see changing. And honestly, and we touched on this in last episode, what we saw there against Saudi Arabia was probably like that's like a basically best case squad for Australia at this point in time. And obviously now you can bring Goodwin in as well, which helps even more. He was probably the only player sort of that you'd consider missing out. So, and it's obviously through suspension, so it's not like, he wasn't picked or he was injured or something. So yeah, I can see Goodwin definitely coming straight back in and slotting in nicely, but the rest of the team looks pretty settled and pretty solid. And it seems like Popovich is happy with, the balance that he's found in the squad. Obviously there's a big question mark, and there has been for a while over Mitchell Duke. He's a striker who's not scoring, which is never a good thing to have. And Vince Rugari, I think it was Vince Rugari, right? He came out with that article defending him and his work rate and stuff. And that's fantastic because it is true that he does offer a lot in that front third in transition. But I think the issue is that, he's not, there's no end product there, right? He's not doing enough to really sort of justify continuing to start him. But then the question is, well, what else do you do? It's not, you're not going to chuck Valupale in there now that he's obviously injured. Like what are your options there? And I think that's obviously a big question mark. But I don't think anything will be done for this Bahrain game. I expect Duke to start again, and people to complain again because that's what they do. But yeah, I don't see wholesale changes. Yeah, perhaps little tweaks here and there to the way that the team looks to attack. And maybe good winning is the obvious one, but I don't really see much else changing, to be honest.
I have a bad feeling about this game. I don't know why.
No.
Here we go. Well, no, but it's Christian saying this, so
I'm just thinking, it'll be a 4-0 win for sure. I'm just thinking back to the Bahrain game at home, and before the red card, we just sort of lacked in that creativity. And in that game, I think Chakati started right back, and it was a completely different formation. Forward at the back with Arnold, and I think down those flanks we struggled a bit to make space and sort of create those chances. Where I think someone like Lewis Miller could be very important. In terms of that right wing back role, again, he provided a bit of a threat there. Kept the Bahrain defense on their toes a bit more, and just sort of offer a bit more of that threat. But yeah, at the end of the day, it's like coming back to Duke, where he does all the good work rate, but there's no end product there. But at the same time, you can't really change anything. So it's sort of back to this constant cycle of what do you do? Away from home to Bahrain, it's not going to be an easy game. Obviously, so. Yeah, I'm a tad worried just about where are the goals going to come from. I know Goodwin's obviously a massive in. That's Popovich will take that any day, but yeah, just struggling to see in the final third where it's all going to come together.
Yeah.
I the one thing that I really did agree with coming out of that Rugari piece was that if Mitchell Duke can be really aggressive in his press, tire out defenders, get subbed off in the 75th minute. And then the example they used in the piece was Nishan Velupale comes on in Adelaide and scores his goal and takes his opportunity well after Duke has already run down these defenders so much. And that's kind of the hidden benefit that's not really crazy obvious for him as a player. So, look, I do think he probably cops more than his fair share. But, he said in there as well, he's happy with it. If it's all going to him, he can deal with it. Just keep it on him and no one else. And they'll be fine as a team. Let's bring it back to the A-League. Former Central Coast chairman Richard Peel has lashed out at Football Australia, claiming they are threatening the future of the A-League men's competition. That's even dire for us. By going ahead with their launch of the national second tier. This is all according to a report from AAP's George Clark. Quote here, I have no issue with a second tier competition, but I have massive issue with a second tier competition being launched over the next 2 seasons, while the APL is stuck in the current TV deal and distributions have been reduced. The A-League can survive if everyone works together, but I don't believe that the FA, which is headed by James Johnson, are genuinely interested in helping the A-League. There are a couple of quite dramatic points in there. And I do want to say, first off, I do empathise with Peel a little bit. He came in as chairman in 2022 when the financial effects of COVID and some poorly spent funds on Keep Up were starting to come through, but yet to be truly felt in earnest. We saw that in the past off-season when the financial distributions got cut to around $500,000. That was the really, really big hit. According to his open letter, the changes in distributions that I mentioned made it impossible for him to meet a set of milestones that he and Mike Charlesworth agreed to when he took over that would allow Peel to purchase a 50% stake of the club. He goes on to say, I do want to point out that the current APL board and upper management, in particular Stephen Conroy and Gino Mara, who is the MacArthur FC chair, are doing an incredible job fighting to restore the A-Leagues, and I believe they will get there. However, it's not going to be there in a timeline that my financial position can accommodate. Now, I think that is all understandable. However, the comments for me, Christian, on the NST specifically missed the mark a fair bit from Peel. Football Australia are not responsible for the A-League success, and that was, it is that way because of the club's direct interests. So that they have a person on the chair. Obviously, they're invested for the future of Australian football, but beyond that, they don't have any responsibility. And I do believe they would step in with some support if the league was actually in danger of properly folding, but we're not quite at that point yet. And I think any suggestion of the contrary is just, a little bit off the mark.
Yeah, he was kind of a bit dramatic there with his comments, you could say. You can understand his passion because he's obviously been through the thick of it with the Mariners. He understands behind the scenes what's been happening with the financial side of things, so you can understand it from that viewpoint. But I mean, yeah, this whole sort of NST stuff, I think it's all about being on the same page. And, when you've got two organizations, and, the FA and the APL, we've had this discussion before. I mean, will it work really? At the end of the day, will all parties get what they want? Because we've seen, in terms of the financial side of it, a club like Melbourne Knights, for example, pull out of the NST because of 500,000, I think, grants, or I think the deal to put forward before, sort of committing towards the project. Clubs like that said, no, we can't commit to it because financially we're just not in a position to do so. And I think, I understand the concerns of, fans and clubs of the A-League and NST clubs who are thinking of joining, saying, okay, financially, is this model sustainable? Look at the TV deals, the distributions being cut, significantly, before this season. It just makes you wonder, is it sustainable for the long term? And, it's bad enough that they haven't sort of committed to a home and away season, as of yet to start things off. I know, at the start we said, okay, it's a good starting point, but originally it was supposed to be a home and away season, right? And then the plans have sort of kept, switching here and there, and the narratives changed. So I think that has to do a bit with the finances, involved in it all. But yeah, it is a tricky situation, but I do understand Peel's frustration.
Well, yeah, one of the points in there that I think you almost stumbled onto is that Football Australia aren't even paying for the NST in like its current form, right? And that has been the big controversial point of conversation, just how much money these clubs have been asked to stump up, as you say, Christian. I can't remember off the top of my head if Melbourne Knights were one of those clubs that passed the technical regulations as well, but there were definitely 7 of them that passed the technical regulations to be a part of the NST, but either could not or would not fork up the guarantee, the bank guarantee, to be a part of the league. So it is, in fact, that specific reason why we are not getting a home and away competition next year, because FA are not paying for it. So, Jacob, I don't quite know what Peel was expecting. If the FA are not running the A-Leagues, they don't own the A-Leagues, they're not spending all this money on the NST. Well, obviously they are spending money on the NST, but not the significant operating funds on it. Then any question of Peel as to how the formulation of that league would affect the A-Leagues, I really don't actually understand the connection.
I don't understand the viewpoint. It's a shocked Pikachu moment. It's, let's get the APL, and we've got to unbundle from the FA because they don't have our best interests in hand. And then you go, it's an absolute travesty now that we've unbundled that the FA don't have our best interests.
Well, one disclaimer there: he took over in chairman as 22.
He did,
right?
he did.
So
yeah,
it's afterwards, but yes,
that is afterwards. But I mean, it's still kind of funny that that's the case. But I agree. I don't really see the connection there between how the FA launching the NST, especially in its current form and with everything that we know about it, is such a big threat to the A-League survive. I mean, Peel is probably the only person I've heard outside of NST, like people involved with the NST, who has faith that clearly this is going to become something big, right? And most people seem to think that the NST is going to struggle to start with. So he's clearly taking the other position and going, no, this is going to be huge. So I mean, maybe the NST need to get him on board, and he'll be able to drum up some enthusiasm for it. But no, yeah, I agree. I really don't understand the connection between it. And honestly, you mentioned it, Lockie, but the FA have no reason, technically to care about the A-League. And everything we have heard as well, this is the weird thing, is this sort of goes against what we have heard over the last 4, 5, 6 months in terms of the discourse between footballing bodies in the country, is that there does seem to be some sort of open discourse and at least an idea of trying to collaborate to better the game in the country. And then this has sort of come out, and it seems to suggest that either that's not the case or that has happened, but now perspectives have changed or something. So it all seems a bit muddied at the moment. And I think that's where this sort of stuff is ripe to come out because it's so muddy. And look, I can't make a decent have a decent opinion on this, right? Because it's just how much of this is true, how much of this is him trying to drum something up to, I don't know. It's not going to get the FA back on board, because you're sort of vilifying them. So I don't quite understand. Yeah, A, the connection that he's trying to make. B, the reason for doing this seems a bit like.
I mean, maybe it's just a vent, right? Because he's no longer in an official position. I'm sure he's had some frustrations when the check came in the mail, at the start of this year, saying that just distributions were going to be cut. Maybe that's how I read it.
I mean, it's the point that you made on Twitter, though, right? Where it's a lot of what we've seen with the finances recently is because of things like during COVID, the need to try and keep clubs afloat in the first place. So it's like, yeah, okay, sure, it sucks having less money than you did before, but at least the clubs are still there. Like, there could be a case of the clubs aren't there, and then the NST isn't a competition to the A-League because there is no A-League. So, it seems a little bit, like I said before, muddied, because there's some things in here which you can kind of understand, but then other things where you go, just think for a second, and it would kind of help you out a little bit. Maybe I'm being a bit too harsh on him here, but
when aren't you ever harsh?
I'll always continue to maintain that the effects of COVID are significantly underrepresented in that conversation about where that Silver Lake money went and the impact on the A-Leagues as a whole. I'll never defend the keep up money, but specifically for that purpose, to keep clubs alive and in the competition during COVID, that cost a lot of money. And it is a major reason why we are experiencing the financial issues we are now. Before we move on from the Mariners, Christian, a little bit of contract news. Dylan Perriak-Cullen signed his first pro contract during the week, taking him to the end of the 26-27 A-League season. We hiked up a bunch of those kind of new first-team keepers in the league, and he's the one remaining that hasn't had a massive blunder that's cost his team points. So I guess that's good enough for a new contract.
Is this going to be the Round Ball Australia curse? Where we talk about the good old commentators curse. I think the Round Ball Australia curse is going to, impact poor Dylan. But no, it goes back to the Mariners, I guess, their project is embedding the youth. And I guess that's the advantage, right? Where they obviously want to keep these players for at least a couple of years, sell them on. And it's just this everlasting, constant money flow, this project where they've got a clear plan. Other clubs in the league are following suit as well. Yes, you're going to get some mistakes as well, like we've seen with a few young keepers so far in the competition this season. And that's to be expected, right? But at the same time, you need to, I guess, give these young kids the experience, and that goes for outfield players, anyone really. Otherwise, if you're not, learning from, the grassroots, developing in the A-League, if you're going to go over to overseas, to try and play your trade there, then you're sort of lost, aren't you? You're going to be coming back to Australia in a couple of years' time. And that was a conversation we had, in seasons past, where we had all these Australians going overseas, like, oh yeah, this is the greatest thing ever. And they come back to the A-League where their careers just sort of take a bit of a nosedive. But hopefully this is the sustainable model moving forward. And I've got full confidence that it will be.
Yeah, congratulations to Dylan. Of course, it is Unite Round coming up this week, all heading up to Sydney. Most of us are heading up to Sydney as well. Unlucky Christian. Didn't have room in the budget for you this year, maybe next time around.
Could have paid the 80 for the motel for you guys to stay.
Yeah, we may have secured a crash on Will's couch. Vince Rigari is reporting that the A-League women's games are very likely to be moved from Leichhardt Oval to Kogarah, which is disappointing, Jacob, due to the quality of the pitch. To have to change a venue this late on. I think selfishly it is a little bit easier transport-wise, so fans might find that a little bit more convenient. But you definitely don't want to be seeing ground changes due to pitch condition.
No, and this was something that, again, in the sort of group chat today, just a back and forth on this, and a case of, was it even necessary in the first place? Like, the pitch played okay over the weekend, but it might just be a case of the A-League's going, we don't want an injury at Unite Round because of the state of the pitch. Like, if we know that it might not be all right, like if it's like borderline, like it's playing okay, but it doesn't look great, maybe let's just play the safe hand and move to another venue. So, you can't really blame them for that, because if somebody did get injured, there'd be outrage over, why did you use this pitch? You knew it was bad last week.
Not just because of the injuries. I think it's more because of the product as well. You see United round, you want that good product because, it was obviously a success last season. They brought it again this season. You don't want these sort of questions to arise to say, okay, why is the state of the pitch this bad? And that's what we saw last week in the derby for the women's.
You don't want any reason for people to just make a negative story out of it.
Be negative,
Yeah,
exactly.
Even though I'm sure Albert Park Lake is still good for a swim, but they still paint it blue when the F1 comes to town, right?
Are they pretty close by, those two stadiums that have sort of switched with Leichhardt? Are they close by, or is it?
I'm not really good with Sydney geography. I believe it's a little bit closer.
So so Kogarah's South Sydney, and there's the train line runs basically right next to it. It's a 5-minute walk from a stop to the stadium, whereas Leichhardt is slightly west, like inner west, and there isn't as much public transport. So in terms of actually getting to the ground, it's arguably a bit easier. But for people who've already made plans and they perhaps are staying somewhere a bit more central or a bit more out west, anticipating going to Leichhardt, that is going to be a real bugbear. And that's something that Paletti brought up, was like, how many people probably have gone, right, okay, I know I want to go to this game at Leichhardt, let's try and get a hotel that's perhaps a little bit more convenient to get to, knowing that the public transport to get there isn't as good. And then all of a sudden now they've got to go the other way down to Kogarah. So
good point.
Look, they're not close. From a public transport perspective, the change really helps things. But there are probably people that are going to be a bit aggrieved by this, because they have done all this planning in advance to anticipating it to be Leichhardt, and now it's not. So
but it goes down to the state of a pitch, right? So what actually happened? I mean, who's actually been playing on it? Because rugby season's done. I mean, what other codes are really playing on it? What's it gotten to be?
Maybe it was a concert or something.
I
stopped bothering to. I don't know. I stopped bothering to look these things up because it just happens so often.
Because the state of the pitch is really that bad. It was shocking when I first saw it on Saturday. I thought, wow. I mean, what is being played here?
Maybe it's just been rainy in Sydney. I don't know.
Must have been pretty bad. It was terrible.
Anyway, there have been plenty of great activations in the fan zone that have been announced. Max Rushton is hosting a Soccer AM style top bins challenge throughout the weekend. Very much looking forward to that. There's going to be a vintage kit market, which, despite a little bit of confusion online today, will be selling A-League kits, just not from this season or last, which I'm assuming is just to protect the APL's interest a little bit. The clubs want to be selling merch here as well. So no, none of this year's or last year's kits allowed, but plenty of that vintage stuff will be there. And then, Jacob, there's something that we're involved in as well, which we're excited about, specifically you and Will. And you've already got the leg up. If you care to explain a little bit?
Yeah, so, I was actually a late addition to this. So there's Harry from New Egypt's football, again, for the second season here at United Round, has organised a creators match, five-a-side. It's going to be at Ultra Football on the Friday. And it was originally going to be Paletti and Will, and Paletti has been a late dropout, and I was called in to replace them. At that point, I wasn't even sure if I was going to be in Sydney at the time that the game was going to be played, but I managed to get the day off work and get the flights in before then. But so Will and I are going to be taking part in that, and like you said, Lockie got the leg up on him already, because for some unbeknownst reason, the guy who hasn't played a game of organised football in over a decade was drafted 5th overall.
Well done.
The reasoning was that of my tactical knowledge, I hate to break it to Joe, but this is five-a-side, so I'm not sure how much that's going to be a massive help. But I guess we'll see. I'm really looking forward to it, though. Put the boots back on.
You can't talk about wing backs now. There's no such thing.
We'll see what I've got cooking, but it's. I'm looking forward to it. It should be.
I can imagine you being a player manager sort of role.
Running around, bring his own whiteboard.
with the little magnets, just switching around.
But no, looking forward to it. Should be great fun.
It's going to be great. 3 p.m. on Friday afternoon at Ultra Football. I'm not 100% sure, in all honesty, what the plans are, but I believe there's some content opportunities afterwards. So if you're around in the afternoon before, I believe it's Perth, Western is the early game on Friday on the men's side of things. Love to see you there, but that'll be good fun as well. Unfortunately, Will, I think, 12th overall out of 14 in the draft?
Yep.
playing for Coast Watch. But you're against each other, which is great.
We are,
The
yeah.
content opportunities are flying.
It's going to be
great.
good.
Yeah, it's going to be good
fun.
fun. The other thing I think that is worth talking about before we get to Unite Round itself is the fact that we have another Sydney derby on the Saturday night, which selfishly, again, I'm very excited about because I will be there. I get to experience my first Sydney derby. But we're having one in round 5, Christian. We already had one in round 1. We're actually getting a Kiwi Classico number 2 in a couple of weeks as well. How does it sit with you that we are, having these big games so close to each other? And obviously, in isolation, I think it is a good thing because if you want to promote Unite Round, you're going to have the big fixtures there, at least the big New South Wales ones, if we're going to have this game in New South Wales. But it isn't ideal that we're having them so close to each other.
Yeah, I would have liked to have the Sydney derby a bit spread out, maybe a few weeks more, because I understand the argument for round 1 when the fixture came out, Sydney derby. You think, okay, you've got these two marquees, Douglas Costa, Juan Mata. The APL are probably thinking behind the scenes, okay, what if one of these players gets injured and you can't retract the same hype? Whereas in round 1, there's more of a chance to, advertise it, leading into the league. It made more sense. But to have it in round 1 and round 5, I just think it's a bit too close to each other. It just doesn't.
Is it worth it to you to spread them out and then sacrifice not having the run in for round 1 and not having the promotion of Unite Round? Is that a worthwhile trade? Is what I'm trying to ask.
Well, I don't think it should be in Unite Round anyway, to start off with. I think the Unite Round should be its own unique round. And other codes have had this debate with AFL and NRL, whereas, should you have these sort of derby games, in these special occasions, these special rounds? I just think it should be separate. I think the Unite Round just should be celebrated, as a whole and not sort of, I don't want to say detract away, but I'm trying to find the word for it. I just think it should be separate. You guys might have a different opinion, but yeah, that's just me.
Well, let me use an AFL example, right? Obviously, it's not like they're having a showdown, so Adelaide versus Port at gather rounds, but they are playing Port Adelaide Hawthorn, which fans of AFL will know was a massive fixture last season, blew up in the final series. It was always picked to be one of the marquee fixtures of gather round. And so one thing we know about the AFL is that they know how to use their fixture as a marketing tool, and it's not something that footballers always nailed, especially because a very traditional outlook would always say you got your 18 or your 20 teams, you play everyone home and away, you hit the computer and you randomize the fixtures and you play what spits out. But being in such a competitive sporting market, Jacob, and especially in the struggle that the A-League's in, it makes a lot of sense to do it the way they're doing it. I think what are we playing? 27 rounds? Yeah. Is that correct, right?
Yeah.
That it helps, playing the derbies 3 times, the more major rivalries 3 times, and a couple of extra fixtures. That helps, and then leaving some of the more minor rivalries to just home and away. I think it's good balance. And as I said, I agree with you, Christian, that it's annoying that they're so close together. But I don't think it is worth the trade. I would rather keep it the way it is because just the opportunity to have the marketable fixture in Unite Round and at the start of the season for round 1 with Mata versus Costa, as you say, I think that's worthwhile for me, Jacob.
Yeah, and it's like you just mentioned, right? There's going to be a third one later on in the season, so it's not like it's done and dusted now. That's it. Derbies are over. Rest of the season, that there isn't that big fixture for these two sides. So, from that perspective as well, I kind of understand it's not as big an issue having them so close together to start the season. It does suck because it does kind of feel perhaps a little bit stale because it was so recent that the last one happened. But I agree with you in terms of the marketing and promotional side of stuff. Having it at Unite Round is huge. But then I do kind of like what Christian's saying, but I think that it shouldn't be there's no big games at Unite Round. I think it should be, Sydney.
I'm not saying don't have any no big games. I'm just saying these unique sort of derbies should be.
Yeah, well, that's and I'm kind of going to get to that because it's like,
do we have big games that aren't derbies though?
Well, Sydney FC and Melbourne Victory, for instance, right? Like the Big Blue, and then at least it's not a case of these teams playing each other again so close to each other. I mean, everyone hates the victory, I guess. So it's easy when they're involved. But I mean, there's plenty of teams, I'm sure, that hate Sydney FC and the Wanderers as well. So, I feel like there is still perhaps the potential to tweak things and have these exciting big games that fans want to go to, that have a good atmosphere and there's a bit of animosity there, but that also aren't just replaying fixtures we saw a couple of weeks ago. Look, I don't hate it as much as some people do. I do think it's okay, especially with a third derby this season. But it would be nice to see something different, perhaps. But then again, like you, Lockie, selfish perspective, it's going to be awesome to actually witness a derby in person. So, that kind of leans in their favour as well for me.
Yeah.
Christian,
I was going to say, even like a original rivalry, if you chuck that fixture in Adelaide and Victory, you give Sydney fans a chance.
But that cannot be played. That cannot be played outside of Adelaide or Melbourne. Like the whole reason that works so well is because it's just the two states that dislike each other. I think if you're playing it in a neutral venue, it doesn't have that same.
Yeah, it doesn't work. You reckon?
Yeah.
That's fair point. I was just thinking it gives fans from Sydney a chance to experience that fixture, whereas Lockie was saying before, he gets a chance to experience the Sydney derby where he wouldn't.
I do get that point
previously, but I understand your point as well, where it wouldn't be the same vibe in terms of atmosphere. I do get that.
Yeah, because the original rivalry is much more tribal, where the Sydney derby, especially at the moment in this era, is the game, the regular season game with the atmosphere, two active supports going at each other. That's good, and the F3 is going to be great as well. On the Friday. Yeah. But we'll, of course, touch on the Unite round more on Friday as we look forward to the weekend. But now to finish us off for today, the Oceanic Pro League. You might not have heard of that before, but it is coming. It has initial plans to launch a full competition starting in 2026, plus I believe some kind of launch tournament. I think kind of your Live Golf Invitational before they got going in 2025. But recently they've invited Australian clubs to attend information session that was held in Brisbane last Tuesday night, intended to garner interest in participation from Australian clubs. I actually asked to attend this information session through Zoom as media, but got no reply back from the OFC. So I don't have any specific information on that yet, but there'll be more to come in the next few weeks. But what is really interesting, I think, throughout this whole thing, Christian, is the timing. Whilst Australian football is going through the whole turmoil of trying to establish the national second tier, as we talked on earlier, I can tell you that there are multiple Australian teams who are exploring this opportunity, and specifically multiple teams that were part of the NST process did attend that information session and are interested. Interested is a word I actually have to be careful using because it very much, what has been told to me, it's kind of an exploratory thing, doing their diligence. They don't want to write off an opportunity without having seen what it's about and considering it. It's a long way from turning into anything real just yet. But the fact that this is all coming up as we're trying to get this NST off the ground, I just think it provides another very dramatic conflict and will give rise to plenty more discussion, I'm sure.
Yeah, Oceanic saying, okay, the NST is about to get off and running next year. Better, put our 2 cents in here and say, did some of these A-League clubs want to join this force? I mean, like you said, like
not A-League, not A-League.
No, not A-League. Sorry,
Australian
I'm just saying
clubs. Yeah.
Australian clubs. I want to confirm though, Lucky, is that so these clubs are sort of just dipping their toe in the water. They're just talking, in the background, just exploring.
So there was an information night held last Tuesday that I know multiple clubs attended and learnt about. So that's as far as it has gone as of now. They've attended an information session. OFC would have presented some of their ideas to them, and that's all we have so far.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it is interesting how it all play out. I mean, I don't see it going too much further. I'd be shocked if it does sort of advance to, more sort of negotiations and it does sort of pan out, the way I guess we sort of don't want it to, I guess. I don't know about you, Jacob, if it'd be a good idea or not, but yeah.
I think for the OFC, right, it's something that they've kind of wanted for a while to try and I mean, because it's such an isolated region in terms of world football, to try and bring everybody together, I think is a really good idea. And what we see typically in the at least in the Champions League, the OFC Champions League, is the New Zealand clubs running riot every single time. And I think the idea is that by, obviously inviting interest from Australian clubs, you're hoping to try and bring up the general level of competition that's there, because teams that are just playing teams at the same level are going to get better. That they have to be tested, they have to be playing better opposition, but they also can't just be thrown completely in the deep end against teams that are way better. So it's about trying to find a balance, and I think that's the general idea. I think for the OFC, it's huge, and they're obviously going to really, really want this. It's about what benefit does this provide to the Australian clubs who are who are going to enter. And I think that's, obviously we're going to have to wait to find out more information about exactly what this whole thing is going to look like, what it's going to be, how it's going to work, before we can sort of make a judgment call on that. But I think that's going to be the key thing is what are they, because there's a ton of benefits here for the OFC. It's about what are the benefits to these Australian clubs that are going to come in, if any are, and I think that's going to be the make or break for the success of this competition, is if they can successfully get these Australian clubs on board by offering them something in return for their competing in this tournament.
Yeah, bang on the money, I think. And it's important to note this is a big FIFA initiative as well. Gianni Infantino has been involved in Oceanic football for a little while. And first and foremost, this is about creating a professional pathway for these island nations. You probably wouldn't even throw New Zealand too much into that in this current thought process, because their pathways are becoming a lot more established through A-League football and through their professional clubs that already exist. Technically, Oceania, if you're counting Wellington and Auckland as part of the APL, part of Australia, part of Asia, then Oceania doesn't have a professional football club. And, Auckland City are the team that go into the FIFA World Cup every year, a Club World Cup, and now every 4 years, of course, we're going to this bigger model. But that is the mission here. And you're right, Jacob. There's a lot of benefits for the OFC here, because to create professional clubs in these countries gives pathways for players to come through. And, we'll see another Dan Hall, Brian Kaltak, those kinds of players come through. But you're right. And that's why I really don't see a lot of value in any of the teams that are talking about maybe being in the NST, seriously considering this OFC league, because the standard would be so far below what we're dealing with. New Zealand played in OFC international qualifiers, literally against amateur footballers to try and qualify for the World Cup. So there is a huge disparity in the level of football we're talking about, Christian. Maybe there's an odd Australian that wants to get involved, but of course, if they do, then we have this whole can of worms about clubs in Australia playing in two different confederations. I don't even want to think about what would happen.
Yeah. We've gone through too many cans of worms, so I don't want to go through another can of worms. But when would this tournament be played? Is there a sort of a set?
No details like that.
Yeah. I was going to say, when would it sort of fit in?
And they of course, they already do operate the OFC Champions League as well. They have said that this would run in tandem with that, but there's so many things going on.
Yeah, there'll definitely be more benefits, I guess, for the OFC teams than for Australia, because, like you said, it's what benefit will it provide, Australian clubs in terms of the competitive element to it. You might as well just stay domestically and just play in your local league, what you have been doing season by season. We've been seeing players obviously being promoted to the A-League, Harry Sawyer being the most recent one, to MacArthur. You're starting to see more and more of that. So, from a young player perspective, does it really make sense to play at that sort of level? I'm not too sure.
Yeah, interesting one to follow. We will have more on that in the coming weeks as well. Finally, the Matildas have announced their player squad doesn't quite do it justice. Maybe
Player
the reserves
army.
team. Yeah, the army, the squadron, the legion. There's a lot of them going into this window. There's 4 games, of course. We believe that the reason why the squad is so big is because a number of the European players simply aren't allowed or didn't have to be released by their club, so they're being called back before the last games, I think is the correct technicality there. So we're going to see a lot of young players get involved in their first Matilda squad. Isabel Gomez scored the winner or played the assist in the grand final last year for Sydney FC. I can't remember off the top of my head, but she's one of them getting involved. If you want to hear a deeper breakdown of the squad and the Matildas' upcoming window. The Dubcast on Wednesday mornings, our new podcast, of course. Christian, I believe you're on this week. You'll tell them all about it then. So keep an eye out for that episode. But that will do for this episode of the Round Ball Australia podcast. Jacob Stevens, thank you very much. I'm glad to be back in the chair today.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
I was going to say, how does it feel to be back where you belong? You know?
It's lovely. I feel at home. It's so good.
Like I said, I do enjoy hosting, but I don't necessarily enjoy all the responsibilities that come with it, such as trying to keep everybody in line and doing things like a run sheet and writing an intro. And you can have that back quite happily. Happy to step in when needed, but you do a very good job. And it's definitely much easier for me being on this side of things.
Well, don't get too comfortable because I know we've sorted it out already, but in a couple of weeks you'll be back on.
I will.
You get 2 in a row. All right, Christian Montegan as well. Thank you, mate. Appreciate it as always.
It's a pleasure. I was going to say quickly as well, I was going to jump in. You notice how Jacob Lockie's he's organised it for the 150th episode for Lockie to host it. It's not the 149. Jacob didn't get the 150. Lockie had to align it perfectly to host the 150.
It's not like I planned this. Come on.
Yeah.
I'm not that good. All right. We'll be back. I forget which day of the week. There we go. Friday. I always do this. For some reason, days of the week are so hard when we turn on the podcast. Anyway,
you have to write it on the rundown sheet.
Yeah, I really should start doing that. We'll be back on Friday, of course. The Socceroos game Wednesday morning. We're going to have a video out on Wednesday morning recapping that game as well. So if you want a little bit of instant reaction, the YouTube channel is the place to be. But apart from that, we'll see you on the podcast on Friday. Thank you all very much for listening. We appreciate your company as always, and see you Unite round. Goodbye.